I found a letter from my stalker. Chapter 1. The First Letter. And the air was thick that night, heavy with a silence that clung like damp cloth. Alex couldn't sleep. Something in the darkness gnawed at the edge of his thoughts, creeping like an invisible hand reaching out from the shadows. It was past midnight, and the house was silent. He lay awake, eyes tracing patterns in the darkness, when he heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible rustling by his door. For a moment he froze, his heart quickening as he strained his ears, trying to make sense of the sound. It was too quiet for footsteps, too intentional to be the creak of an old house settling into the night. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the noise stopped. Silence pressed down again, thick and expectant. He waited, not daring to move, until curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, darker, forced him out of bed. Barefoot and moving quietly, Alex opened his bedroom door and peered down the hallway, the shadows thick and unmoving. His gaze landed on a faint shape lying on the floor, a small pale envelope, the paper almost glowing in the dimness. He hesitated, heart pounding, but eventually took a few steps forward and reached down to pick it up. The envelope was cold, far colder than it should have been, as if it had been left out in the chill of the night air. Alex's fingers traced the paper, feeling the roughness of the unmarked surface. There was no name, no address, just his fingers trembling as he held it. Something about this letter felt wrong, like it didn't belong here, as if it had somehow slipped through a tear in reality to land on his floor. Swallowing, he tore open the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was familiar yet strange, an elegant script that seemed to waver and pulse on the page, as if it were alive. "Dear Alex," it began, but the words seemed to blur and twist as he read, shifting out of focus until he felt dizzy. The more he read, the colder the room seemed to become, as if the very presence of the letter were sucking the warmth from the air around him. "Do you remember me, Alex?" the letter asked. A chill ran down his spine. Of course he didn't remember. The name at the bottom, Zara, stirred something faint, like a name he'd once heard in a dream. Memories teased the edge of his mind, slipping away the moment he reached for them. An image came to him then, unbidden, a pale, narrow face framed by wild, dark hair, eyes wide and dark, staring at him from the other side of a fogged window. She felt both familiar and entirely alien, a presence he couldn't place. He read on, his eyes tracing each sentence as dread pooled in his stomach. "It's been a long time, longer than you remember, but we were once close." The word lingered, heavy, weighted with a significance he couldn't grasp. "I've tried to reach you before, but I know you don't remember. You're not supposed to." The sentence sent a shiver through him. It was as if the letter were speaking to some deep, forgotten part of him, a place locked away where the name Zara and the face he couldn't quite recall might have resided. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts, but the letter had its hold on him, drawing him deeper into its strange, sinister rhythm. "I live in shadows now, Alex," the letter continued, the words somehow sharper, cutting into his mind with a serrated edge. "I exist in the corners of your memory, a ghost trapped between pages, a whisper you aren't meant to hear. You may not remember what we had, but I do. I remember every moment, every conversation, every promise." He could almost hear her voice then, soft and low, echoing in the stillness. The words conjured an image of dark woods, a place he didn't recognize yet felt drawn to. In the recesses of his mind, he could see himself standing in a clearing under a pale moon, a shiver coursing through him as the forest around him seemed to breathe, alive with a presence he could neither see nor touch. As he stared at the letter, words shifted again, forming new sentences that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. "I am close, Alex. Closer than you think. I watch you in moments when you believe you're alone. I slip through cracks, whisper in the silence. I see you, even when you don't see me." A sudden surge of dread flooded him, and he glanced around the room, half expecting to see her watching from the shadows. But the room was empty, only the cold, silent dark pressing in from all sides. His hands shook, and he realized he was holding his breath. The final lines were scrawled, jagged and desperate, unlike the elegant hand of the rest of the letter. "They won't let me go, Alex. The fireflies keep me here, lost, forgotten. Every time you remember, they take it away. You're the only one who can help me. Please, come find me." And beneath, her name again, Zara. But something about it was wrong. The ink seemed to bleed, shifting before his eyes like a living thing, her name morphing into something unrecognizable as he stared, as if whatever force bound her to this letter was fighting to erase her name even now. His heart pounded, each beat echoing louder until he was sure he could hear another set of footsteps in sync with his own pulse, a presence hovering just beyond his reach. He wanted to tear his eyes from the letter, to crumple it, throw it away, but he couldn't. Something compelled him to keep reading, to memorize every line, every word, as if it were the only connection to a past he had forgotten. The cold air seemed to press in closer, thickening like fog, and he felt the weight of unseen eyes watching him, waiting. Slowly, he folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and held it close to his chest. He knew somehow that this wouldn't be the last letter. The next would come soon, slipping into his life with the same quiet, unassuming terror, dragging him further into a darkness he was beginning to feel he would never escape. But for tonight, he returned to his room, the letter tucked under his pillow like a cursed relic, Zara's words echoing in his mind as sleep finally claimed him. In the dark, he dreamed of fireflies, tiny, glowing eyes hovering in the shadows, watching him with a hunger that defied comprehension. And in the distance, faint but clear, he thought he heard her voice calling his name. Chapter 2. Forgotten Encounters. Alex woke up in a cold sweat, his pulse racing as if he had just escaped from something lurking in the dark. The memory of the dream lingered, an impression of shadows and flickering lights, whispers threading through the stillness like smoke. The image of fireflies drifted in his mind, tiny, glowing eyes hovering just beyond his reach, watching him with an intensity that left him feeling violated, even in the safety of his bedroom. The letter from Zara lay on his bedside table, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow alive. Every time he glanced at it, the edges seemed to blur, the ink dancing and writhing as if it were a living thing. He reached out, hesitantly, picking it up with trembling fingers. As he touched it, a faint chill passed through him, as though the paper held some lingering trace of whatever dark place Zara now inhabited. The words on the page pulsed in his memory as he read through the letter again, drawn in despite his growing sense of dread. "I watch you, closer than you think." Her handwriting, once familiar, now seemed foreign and distorted, like a language twisted by time and darkness. The edges of his memory throbbed with something half-remembered, an image of Zara that slipped through his fingers every time he tried to recall her face. He knew they'd once been close, that much was true, but beyond that, nothing, only a void where her memory should have been. As the morning light crept through his window, Alex felt a pull, an urge he couldn't ignore. The letter was more than a message. It was a beckoning, a siren call drawing him to remember. He felt as if Zara's voice were whispering in his ear, urging him to look deeper, to remember moments that seemed to live only in the shadows of his mind. It was as though his memories had been hollowed out, echoes of a life he had forgotten. Janatsuwosi-tom determined, he dressed quickly, heading out into the cool morning air. The streets were empty, the silence oppressive. Every step echoed, as if the world itself were listening, waiting. He walked without direction, yet something guided him, an instinct buried deep within that tugged him toward a park on the outskirts of town, a place he hadn't thought of in years. As he entered the park, a wave of nostalgia hit him, sharp and visceral. He knew this place. Memories danced at the edges of his consciousness, elusive yet hauntingly familiar. There was a bench by the edge of a small, dark pond, and as he neared it, fragments of Zara's face drifted through his mind, a flash of her wild hair, her eyes dark and piercing, her presence both haunting and gentle. But each memory slipped away as quickly as it came, leaving only a lingering sense of emptiness. He sat on the bench, the damp chill of the wood seeping through his jeans, and let his eyes drift over the pond. The water was dark, reflecting nothing but a dull grey sky, and he had the unsettling feeling that it was watching him. An inexplicable fear gnawed at him, telling him he wasn't alone, that something unseen lurked beneath the water's surface. In that moment, a memory surfaced, vague yet vivid, a vision of him and Zara sitting together, laughter floating between them like a forgotten melody. She had spoken of strange things, of a presence that watched her, of lights that followed her everywhere. Fireflies, she had said. They were always with her, casting her in a pale, eerie glow, even in the daylight. As the memory faded, a flicker caught his eye. Something moved at the edge of the pond, a shadow that seemed to slink through the undergrowth. He felt an irrational urge to look closer, to peer into the darkness. But as he leaned forward, a faint whisper slipped through the air, sending a chill down his spine. "Alex." He froze, his heart pounding as the sound of his name drifted to him, as soft as a breath, as cold as the grave. He glanced around, the hair on his arms standing up, but saw nothing, just shadows and the still, watching water. Atam. When he looked back at the pond, he saw them, fireflies. A dozen or more, hovering just above the water's surface, their tiny lights flickering in the dim morning. They pulsed in unison, a strange hypnotic rhythm that seemed to draw him in, luring him closer. He felt his body moving forward, an invisible thread pulling him toward the edge of the pond, his mind numb and willing. As he knelt by the water's edge, he saw his reflection, pale and distorted. But behind him, another face began to form, a face both familiar and terrifying. Zara's image twisted and warped as if she were trapped beneath the surface, her mouth open in a silent scream. His blood ran cold as he watched, unable to look away, her eyes wide and pleading. The fireflies circled her, their lights casting eerie shadows over her face, illuminating her features in strange, shifting patterns. Her mouth moved, her lips forming words he couldn't hear, but he could feel the meaning in his bones, a silent cry for help, a desperate plea to be remembered. Her eyes bored into him, and in that moment, he remembered. He remembered the forest, the darkness, the whispers. He remembered how she had told him of the curse, of the fireflies that bound her, making her existence fade from the minds of everyone she encountered. He remembered her saying she would find a way to break free, even if it meant dragging him into her world, into the shadows where she now lingered. A sudden gust of wind broke him from the trance, and he stumbled back, his heart pounding. The fireflies scattered, their lights winking out one by one until only darkness remained. He looked down at his hands, trembling and cold, and saw smudges of ink staining his fingers, the same ink that had written Zara's letter. Back home, Alex sat in silence, the weight of what he had seen pressing on him. He tried to shake the image of Zara's face, twisted in fear and pain, from his mind, but she lingered, a ghost at the edge of his memory, refusing to let go. His thoughts drifted to the letter, still resting on his bedside table, and he felt an overwhelming compulsion to read it again, to seek answers in the desperate scrawled words. As he read the letter once more, new lines seemed to bleed onto the page, sentences that hadn't been there before. His stomach twisted as he realized the ink was fresh, as though the letter was still being written, each word a warning, a plea from the other side. "You cannot forget me, Alex. I am bound to you. Every time you remember, they weaken. But each time you forget, they grow stronger. Find me, before they make you forget again." A cold, creeping horror settled over him as he read the final lines. It wasn't just Zara's memory that was fading. Something was actively trying to erase her from his mind, a force determined to keep her trapped, lost in the darkness. He felt a sickening certainty that the fireflies were more than mere insects. They were harbingers of something ancient and malevolent, creatures that thrived in shadows, feeding on forgotten souls. That night, as he lay in bed, the fireflies returned, their tiny lights hovering at the edge of his vision. He could feel their presence, a weight pressing on his chest, whispering promises of forgetfulness, of the peace that comes with letting go. But each time he closed his eyes, Zara's face would appear, her eyes wide and terrified, begging him to remember, to hold on to her before she disappeared forever. Sleep eluded him, and as dawn broke, he realized with a sickening dread that he was being drawn deeper into Zara's world. The fireflies were waiting, watching, and the pull of the shadows was growing stronger. He was no longer just a bystander. He was becoming a part of her curse, bound to the same fate that had trapped her, an unwilling guardian of a forgotten soul. And somewhere in the darkness, he could hear her voice, faint but insistent, calling his name. Chapter 3. The Flickering Presence. As the days passed, Alex found himself drifting between reality and a dark, twisted version of it, his mind haunted by fragmented memories of Zara. Every time he tried to recall her, he felt a sharp pain, a burning sensation that clouded his mind, leaving him feeling as though he were on the verge of a terrible discovery, yet unable to reach it. He avoided sleep, yet sleep found him, dragging him into restless nightmares where shadows stretched and shifted, always closing in, tightening around him like a living cage. In these dreams, he would see Zara's face, her eyes dark and pleading, her mouth open as if trying to scream, but no sound would emerge. The fireflies were always there, hovering around her like tiny phantoms, casting an unearthly glow over her pale, distorted face. One night, after waking drenched in cold sweat, he found another letter on his bedroom floor. It hadn't been there when he went to bed, yet somehow it now lay in plain sight, as if it had materialized out of thin air. His hands trembled as he reached for it, the chill of the envelope seeping into his fingers, a familiar dread rising in his chest. This letter was different. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, as though written in haste or terror. "Alex, they're coming. I don't have much time. Every time you remember me, they grow weaker. But they know you're trying to hold on. Please, please don't let go. Find me in the place where it all began. You'll know when you see it. Don't let them take you too. Don't let them erase us." The words seared into his mind, each sentence heavy with desperation. But the last line was the one that sent a chill down his spine. The fireflies are watching. They feed on the forgotten. As he read those words, the room grew colder, and the silence thickened, pressing down on him like a suffocating weight. He glanced around, feeling eyes on him, a silent audience lurking in the shadows. The air felt charged, and he could swear he heard faint whispers, a soft, insidious sound that seemed to echo from all around him. But the femme determined to uncover the truth, Alex decided to visit the old forest on the outskirts of town, the same one that had lingered in his mind, shadowed by fragments of forgotten memories. He dressed quickly, slipping into the night without a second thought, feeling the pull of something he couldn't explain, a compulsion that felt almost supernatural. The forest loomed ahead, its twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, casting long, jagged shadows over the ground. The air was thick with mist, and the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled his nostrils as he made his way deeper into the woods. Each step seemed to draw him further from the world he knew, pulling him into a realm where light and shadow bled together, where reality itself seemed to warp and fray. In the distance, he saw a faint glow, a cluster of fireflies hovering in the darkness. They pulsed in eerie, synchronized patterns, illuminating the gnarled trees and casting strange, shifting shadows that danced across the forest floor. As he approached, the fireflies scattered, their lights winking out one by one, until only darkness remained. Yet something lingered, a presence that seemed to press against him from all sides, an invisible force that made his skin crawl. The whispers returned, soft at first, but growing louder, more insistent, as if 1,000 voices were murmuring secrets he was never meant to hear. "Alex!" He froze, his heart hammering as he recognized Zara's voice among the whispers. She sounded distant, her voice distorted as if coming from somewhere deep within the forest, trapped beyond the veil of shadows. He wanted to call out, to ask where she was, but his throat tightened, and the words died on his lips. The fireflies returned, swirling around him in a halo of pale, cold light. They moved with purpose, guiding him deeper into the forest, their glow illuminating a narrow, overgrown path that twisted through the trees. He followed, his steps slow and hesitant, his every sense on high alert. The forest felt alive, breathing, watching, the shadows seeming to shift and pulse in time with his heartbeat. As he ventured deeper, memories began to surface. Hazy, half-formed images of him and Zara, wandering through these very woods as children. He could see her laughing, running ahead, her dark hair flying behind her like a shadow. She had always been fascinated by the fireflies, calling them her little lights. But as he remembered, a feeling of dread seeped into the memory, a sense of something dark and ancient lurking just beyond their innocent games. The memory shifted, and he saw himself as a teenager, Zara by his side, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a fear he couldn't understand. She had tried to tell him something that night, tried to explain, but he hadn't listened. Or had he forgotten? The details were fragmented, slipping through his mind like sand through his fingers, each piece of the puzzle refusing to fit. Suddenly, the fireflies scattered, and he found himself standing in a small clearing. The ground was covered in damp moss, and at the centre stood a large, twisted tree, its bark blackened and scarred, as if struck by lightning. He felt a deep sense of unease as he approached, the air growing colder, heavier. There, at the base of the tree, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A ring of fireflies circled the ground, their pale light illuminating an object half buried in the earth, a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn and weathered, but somehow untouched by time. He reached down, his fingers brushing the cover, and felt a jolt of recognition. This was Zara's journal. He remembered it now, faintly, a relic from their childhood, a book she had carried with her everywhere, filled with her thoughts, her secrets. He opened the journal, the pages brittle and yellowed, each one covered in Zara's handwriting. As he flipped through the pages, his heart pounded, the words blurring and shifting, forming dark, twisted passages that spoke of shadows, of voices, of creatures that lurked in the dark, feeding on memories, on the essence of those they could erase from existence. One passage caught his eye, the ink smeared as if written in a hurry. I tried to leave, but they won't let me go. The fireflies are their servants, their eyes in the dark. They keep me here, bound to this place, feeding on my memories, on my soul. I'm becoming a shadow, just like them. I need Alex. He's the only one who can remember, the only one who can save me. The words burned into his mind, each sentence filled with Zara's desperation, her terror. He could feel her presence in the pages, her spirit trapped, lost, bound to the forest by some dark force that had claimed her as its own. And he understood now, the fireflies were more than mere insects. They were sentinels, guardians of something ancient and malevolent, creatures that fed on the forgotten, on the memories of those who ventured too far into the dark. As he closed the journal, he felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of being watched. He glanced around, and there, at the edge of the clearing, he saw them, the fireflies, dozens of them, their lights pulsing in eerie synchronization. They hovered in silence, their glow casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. And then he saw her. Zara stood among them, her form pale and translucent, her eyes wide and empty, her face twisted in a silent scream. She reached out to him, her mouth moving, but no sound came. He felt her fear, her desperation, her plea for help, and he took a step forward, compelled to reach out, to save her. But as he moved, the fireflies swarmed, forming a barrier between them, their lights intensifying until he could barely see. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind with dark, insidious thoughts, urging him to leave, to forget, to let her go. Alex. Her voice broke through the whispers, soft and faint, but filled with a desperate hope. Don't let them take me. Remember me. Please. The fireflies closed in, their lights blinding, suffocating, and he felt himself slipping, his memories fading, the weight of forgetfulness pressing down on him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. He tried to hold on to her image, her voice, but the fireflies pushed him back, driving him out of the clearing, out of the forest, their whispers filling his mind with the promise of peace, of oblivion. As he stumbled out of the forest, the memory of Zara's face began to fade, her voice growing distant, her presence slipping away like a half-remembered dream. But deep down, he knew she was still there, trapped, waiting, her spirit bound to the shadows, her soul tethered to the fireflies that watched and waited, feeding on the fragments of her existence. And as he walked away, he knew that they would come for him too. Chapter 4. The Curse of the Fireflies. Alex's mind was a battleground. Memories of Zara flickered like the fireflies that haunted him, brief flashes of light in an unending sea of darkness. He tried to hold on to her image, her voice, but each time he thought he had it, the memory slipped away, like smoke curling through his fingers. The following days brought no relief. Each night, he was plagued by disturbing dreams, visions of Zara trapped in the forest, her eyes wide with terror, her face distorted by a desperate plea for help. She would reach for him, but something in the dark always pulled her back, her mouth forming silent words he could never quite hear. Every morning, he awoke with an increasing sense of dread, as if some dark, malignant force were pressing down on him, smothering him under its weight. The fireflies had started following him now, appearing in places they had no business being. He would catch glimpses of their pale, eerie glow in the corners of his apartment, hovering near the windows, as if they were watching, waiting. Once, he saw them gathering outside his bedroom window, their lights pulsing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, drawing him closer with a magnetic pull he couldn't resist. But he knew better than to approach. The memory of Zara's journal haunted him, the twisted passages describing the fireflies as servants of something ancient, something malevolent. She had called them eyes in the dark, creatures that fed on memories, on the essence of those they trapped in their invisible web. Ta'i prei. One evening, desperate for answers, he decided to return to the forest. He had to know the truth, to understand what had happened to Zara. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, trapped and waiting, bound to the shadows by a force he didn't understand. The fireflies seemed to guide him as he walked, their lights hovering just at the edge of his vision, flickering like beacons leading him into the heart of darkness. The forest was silent when he entered, the air thick with an unnatural stillness that set his nerves on edge. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting in strange, unnatural shapes, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. The path before him seemed to stretch endlessly, winding deeper into the darkness, as if the forest itself were alive, drawing him into its depths. The deeper he went, the colder it became, until the air was biting against his skin, each breath a cloud of mist in the chill. He wrapped his arms around himself, his footsteps slow and hesitant, every sense on high alert. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes on him, 1,000 invisible presences lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. After what felt like hours, he reached the clearing with the ancient twisted tree. The ground was covered in a thick layer of moss, damp and cold beneath his feet. The tree stood at the center, its bark blackened and scarred, as if it had been touched by some dark force. And there, at the base of the tree, was the journal he had left behind, half buried in the earth, its pages splayed open as if inviting him to read. He knelt down, his fingers brushing the cover, and felt a surge of cold seep through his skin, a sensation that chilled him to the bone. As he flipped through the pages, the words seemed to shift and blur, forming strange, twisted passages that filled him with a sense of dread. One passage caught his eye, the ink smeared and frantic. "They took me, Alex. The fireflies came for me, surrounded me in their light, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. They're not just fireflies. They're something else, something ancient and hungry. They live off memories, feeding on those they trap in the dark. They're bound to the forest, to the shadows, and now, so am I." A shiver ran down his spine as he read the words, the weight of Zara's terror pressing down on him, her fear seeping through the pages. He could almost hear her voice, faint and broken, calling to him from somewhere beyond the veil of reality, begging him to remember, to hold on to her before the fireflies took everything. The ground beneath him suddenly felt unstable, as if something were shifting beneath the surface. He staggered back, his heart pounding, and watched in horror as the earth began to split, cracks forming around the base of the tree. From the fissures, a swarm of fireflies emerged, their lights pulsing in a sickly, unnatural rhythm, casting the clearing in an eerie glow. They swirled around him, their lights blinding, suffocating, filling his mind with strange, distorted whispers. He could hear Zara's voice among them, faint and distorted, as if trapped in a nightmare, her words a desperate plea for help. "Alex, please, remember me. The fireflies closed in, their lights intensifying until he could barely see, their whispers growing louder, filling his mind with dark, insidious thoughts. He felt his memories slipping away, fragments of Zara's face, her voice, her laughter, fading into the darkness, leaving only a hollow emptiness in their wake. Desperate, he reached out, trying to hold on to her memory, to keep her alive in his mind. But the fireflies were relentless, their lights searing through him, tearing at his thoughts, erasing Zara from his mind piece by piece. He could feel himself slipping, his consciousness fading, as if he were being pulled into the same dark place that had claimed her. Just when he thought he was lost, a surge of strength surged through him, a desperate will to resist, to hold on to Zara's memory with every ounce of his being. He pushed back against the fireflies, his mind a battleground of light and darkness, his will clashing against the ancient force that sought to consume him. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The fireflies scattered, their lights winking out one by one, until only darkness remained. Alex collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, his body trembling with exhaustion. The memory of Zara lingered in his mind, faint but intact, a fragile thread connecting him to her, keeping her spirit alive in the face of the darkness. He knew now that he couldn't do this alone. The fireflies were too powerful, their grip on Zara too strong. If he wanted to save her, he would have to delve deeper into the mystery of the forest, to uncover the ancient curse that bound her to the shadows. But he was running out of time. He could feel the fireflies watching, waiting, their presence a constant threat lurking at the edge of his mind. They would come for him again, he knew, and each time it would be harder to resist, harder to hold on to Zara. With a heavy heart, he turned and made his way out of the forest, the weight of his task pressing down on him. The darkness clung to him as he walked, the whispers of the fireflies echoing in his mind, a haunting reminder of the fate that awaited him if he failed. But he wouldn't give up. He couldn't. For Zara, for the girl he barely remembered, the girl whose memory was slipping through his fingers, he would fight. He would return to the forest, face the fireflies, and uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As he left the clearing, he could feel their eyes on him, a silent, watchful presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment when his strength would falter, when they could finally claim him as their own. But he wouldn't let them win. Not yet, not while he still had the memory of Zara, fragile and flickering, but alive, a light in the darkness guiding him forward. The fireflies would come for him again, but this time he would be ready. Chapter 5. A Plan to Remember. Alex hadn't spoken to anyone in days. The weight of Zara's memory, fragile and elusive, weighed heavily on him. Shadows seemed to cling to him, whispers followed him wherever he went, and every night the fireflies gathered just outside his window, their eerie glow a haunting reminder of his inevitable fate if he failed. One morning, after another restless night, he finally decided to take action. He couldn't keep fleeing from the fireflies and waiting for memories of Zara to slip through his fingers like sand. It was clear that the forest, the fireflies, and whatever ancient curse bound Zara were all tied to something deep and sinister. If he was going to save her, he'd need to face the forest's malevolent force head-on. He sat down with Zara's journal, flipping through the worn pages, looking for anything that might guide him. The journal had changed since he'd found it in the clearing. Entries appeared where there had been none. Words rearranged themselves, and new passages seemed to bleed onto the pages, darkening the paper like fresh ink. It was as if Zara's spirit was still communicating with him, using the journal as a bridge between their worlds. One entry, scrawled in jagged handwriting that seemed frantic and desperate, caught his eye. I remember the old willow tree, the heart we carved into its trunk, the symbol of our promise. Meet me there, Alex. If you can remember, meet me there. They won't let me go unless you hold on to me. Only you can bring me back. A chill crawled up his spine as he read the words. The old willow tree. Memories of childhood rushed back, half-formed and hazy, but he could recall laughing with Zara, running through the forest together. The willow tree had been their meeting place, a secret hideaway where they'd carved their names into the bark, a mark of their bond. He'd nearly forgotten. But now, the image felt vivid and raw, like an old wound reopening. As night fell, Alex set out for the forest, his resolve steady but his heart pounding with fear. He didn't know what awaited him, but he felt Zara's presence guiding him, as though her spirit were woven into the fabric of the forest itself. The fireflies were there too, their lights flickering at the edges of his vision, a silent, watchful threat. The deeper he went, the more distorted the forest seemed to become. Shadows stretched and twisted, forming shapes that slithered in his peripheral vision. The trees seemed to lean in, as if listening, their branches reaching out like claws. The air was thick and damp, each breath heavy with the scent of decay and something older, a musty, ancient scent that seemed to seep from the very soil. Finally, he saw it. The willow tree. It stood at the edge of a small clearing, its branches drooping like dark curtains, casting long shadows over the ground. The trunk was thick and gnarled, its bark blackened and cracked, and there, in the middle, was the heart he and Zara had carved so long ago. It was faint, but he could make out the initials within it, A+Z, their bond, marked for eternity. He reached out, fingers brushing the rough bark, and felt a surge of memories flooding back. Zara's laughter, her dark eyes wide with excitement, her voice echoing through the trees as they promised to be friends forever. But beneath these memories was something darker, a shadow that seemed to whisper of things he couldn't yet understand. A soft rustling broke the silence, and Alex turned, heart hammering. The fireflies had gathered in the clearing, their lights forming a circle around the willow tree, their glow casting strange shadows across the ground. But it wasn't just the fireflies. There were other shapes in the darkness, faint and flickering, like phantoms slipping between the trees. And then he saw her. Zara's figure appeared within the circle of fireflies, her form pale and translucent, her eyes hollow and empty. She reached out to him, her face twisted in pain, her mouth opening in a silent scream. The fireflies circled her, their lights pulsing, illuminating her face in an unearthly glow. She was close, yet so far, as though separated by a veil he couldn't breach. He took a step forward, heart pounding with desperation. "Zara!" he called, his voice breaking the stillness. But she didn't respond, her expression frozen in that same desperate, pleading look, her mouth forming words he couldn't hear. He glanced down at the journal, clutching it tightly, and opened it to the most recent page. New words had appeared, written in that same frantic handwriting. "They're holding me, Alex. They feed on my memories, on every piece of me that you try to remember. You have to be strong. Hold on to me. Don't let them take me away." A chill ran down his spine as he read the words. The fireflies were feeding on Zara's memories, erasing her existence one piece at a time, consuming her very essence. And now they wanted him too. The realization settled over him like a shroud. If he couldn't hold on to her, if he let her memory slip, she would be lost forever. Another spirit bound to the forest, forgotten and alone. Suddenly, the fireflies moved, their lights intensifying, swirling around him in a dizzying pattern. They formed a barrier between him and Zara, their whispers growing louder, filling his mind with dark, insidious thoughts. He felt his memories slipping, fragments of Zara's face and voice fading, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. "No," he whispered, gripping the journal tighter, forcing himself to remember. He pictured Zara's face, her laughter, the warmth in her eyes, the way she'd always been there for him, even when they were young. He held on to each memory, each precious fragment, refusing to let the fireflies take her away. The fireflies pulsed, their lights blinding, but he forced himself to look through them, to focus on Zara. Slowly, painfully, he took a step forward, pushing against the invisible barrier they had created, his mind a battleground of light and darkness, memories and oblivion. With each step, the fireflies intensified their assault, filling his mind with whispers, tempting him to forget, to let go. But he resisted, his will a steady flame in the darkness, fueled by his determination to save her. He reached out, his fingers grazing Zara's, and felt a surge of cold, a chill that seeped through his skin and settled deep within his bones, but he held on. For a brief moment, her eyes met his, and he saw a spark of recognition, a glimmer of the girl he had once known, hidden beneath the layers of darkness and despair. Her lips moved, forming a single word, a name. Alex! The fireflies hissed, their lights flaring with anger, but he held his ground, refusing to let go. He could feel them pressing against him, trying to drive him back, to erase Zara from his mind. But he wouldn't give up. Not now. Not when he was so close. As he looked into her eyes, he saw a glimmer of hope, a flicker of the spirit he remembered, and he knew, deep down, that he couldn't do this alone. He needed to break the curse, to sever the fireflies' hold on her, to free her from the darkness that had claimed her. With a sudden surge of determination, he pressed the journal into her hands, forcing her to take it. "This is yours, Zara," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Your memories, your life. Hold on to it. Remember who you are." The fireflies swarmed, their lights flashing, their whispers rising to a deafening roar. But Zara clutched the journal, her fingers tightening around it, her form solidifying, her eyes filling with recognition. And then, with a final desperate cry, she stepped forward, breaking through the barrier of fireflies, her hand reaching out to him. The fireflies scattered, their lights winking out one by one until only darkness remained. For a brief moment, they stood together, the silence heavy around them, the forest watching in stillness. And then she smiled, a sad, haunting smile, filled with a lifetime of pain and longing. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a faint echo, barely audible. And as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, she faded, her form dissolving into the mist, leaving only the journal in his hands, the final trace of a forgotten soul. He stood in the clearing, alone, the fireflies gone, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. The forest seemed different, as if the ancient curse had lifted, as though the shadows themselves had retreated, leaving only the faint glow of dawn. But he knew, deep down, that Zara was still there, her spirit finally at peace, freed from the darkness that had claimed her. The journal remained in his hands, a testament to her life, her memories, her existence. And as he walked away, he felt a strange sense of calm, a quiet acceptance, knowing that he had kept his promise, that he had saved her from the oblivion that had threatened to consume her. The fireflies never returned, and the whispers faded, leaving only the silence of the forest, a haunting reminder of the forgotten souls that lingered, bound to the shadows, waiting for someone to remember. But he would never forget. Chapter 6. A New Life in Shadows. The quiet of the forest was absolute. Alex could still feel Zara's touch, cold as death, lingering on his fingertips. He thought he'd freed her spirit, breaking the curse that had imprisoned her. Yet as he walked away, something gnawed at him, a hollow, gnawing sensation that seemed to grow with every step. Her voice echoed in his mind, fading, drifting like mist in the early dawn. But as the sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating the path back to town, a creeping dread settled over him. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, slinking through the undergrowth, and he felt their silent, watchful eyes boring into his back. The forest seemed to shift with each step, the trees leaning in as if trying to block his path, as if trying to reclaim him. He tried to shake the feeling, reminding himself that he'd kept his promise, that Zara was free. Wasn't she? Reaching the edge of town, Alex felt the weight of exhaustion crashing down on him. His apartment was quiet, the air stale and lifeless, as if it had been abandoned for ages. He shut the door behind him, but the silence pressed in, thick and unsettling. He glanced around, half expecting to see the fireflies waiting in the shadows, their lights flickering with a mocking familiarity, but there was only emptiness. After hours of tossing and turning, Alex finally slipped into a fitful sleep. But in his dreams, he found himself back in the forest, standing in the clearing by the willow tree. The ground was covered in a thick, swirling mist, and the fireflies were everywhere, hovering just above the ground, their lights pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. And there, in the center of the clearing, Zara stood, her eyes empty, her face twisted in pain. "You didn't save me, Alex," she whispered, her voice hollow and cold. "You only bound me to you." He reached out, but she recoiled, her figure dissolving into a cloud of mist and fireflies that swarmed around him, their lights blinding. The whispers grew louder, filling his mind, drowning out his thoughts until all he could feel was their cold, suffocating presence pressing in on him. When he awoke, he felt a chill in his bones, a sensation that lingered long after he'd left the dream behind. And it wasn't just the cold that unsettled him. It was the feeling that he wasn't alone, that something unseen lurked in the corners of his room, watching, waiting. Days turned into weeks, but the shadows never left. He started seeing the fireflies again, flickering just at the edge of his vision, appearing in places where they had no business being. They were in his bathroom, hovering by the mirror, their tiny lights casting strange, twisted reflections. He would see them in the kitchen, circling above his sink, their whispers faint but persistent, like an itch he couldn't scratch. And then there were the memories, visions that would flash before his eyes without warning. He would be washing his hands, only to see his reflection shift, Zara's pale face staring back at him from the mirror, her eyes hollow and accusing. Or he would be walking down the street, only to feel her cold touch on his arm, her voice a faint whisper in his ear. "Remember me, Alex. Remember what you did." He tried to ignore it, telling himself that it was just his imagination, that the trauma of the forest had left him paranoid and jumpy, but the visions grew stronger, more vivid, until he couldn't distinguish them from reality. He began losing track of time, days slipping by in a blur, his mind a fog of forgotten memories and half-formed thoughts. One night, as he sat in his dimly lit apartment, he heard a soft, persistent tapping at the window. He turned, heart racing, and saw a single firefly hovering just outside the glass, its light pulsing in an unnatural rhythm. He stared at it, mesmerized, his mind slipping into a trance as he watched the tiny creature bobbing in the darkness. Without thinking, he opened the window, and the firefly drifted inside, its light casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. It hovered in front of him, and for a brief moment, he could swear he saw Zara's face in the glow, her eyes wide and pleading. "Alex," she whispered, her voice soft and cold, like a distant echo. "You can't leave me. Not now." He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The firefly followed, its light growing brighter, more intense, filling the room with an eerie, pulsating glow. Shadows stretched and twisted, forming strange, distorted shapes that danced across the walls, closing in on him from all sides. He tried to shut his eyes, to block out the vision, but the shadows seemed to seep into his mind, filling his thoughts with dark, insidious whispers. "Remember! Remember!" The room grew colder, the air thick and suffocating, and he felt a crushing weight pressing down on him, a force that seemed to be pulling him back, dragging him into a darkness he couldn't escape. He gasped, struggling to breathe, but the whispers drowned out his thoughts, filling his mind with images of Zara's face, her eyes hollow and empty, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. Desperate, he bolted from his apartment, stumbling into the night. The streets were empty. The city bathed in an eerie, unnatural silence that made his skin crawl. He walked aimlessly, his mind a blur of fear and confusion, the shadows pressing in on him from all sides. He didn't know how long he wandered, but eventually he found himself standing at the edge of the forest. The trees loomed before him, their branches twisting in the darkness, casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. The forest called to him, its silence broken only by the faint, distant hum of fireflies waiting within, their lights flickering like stars in the night. He felt a strange compulsion to go to them, to step back into the darkness and face whatever lay waiting for him. With a deep breath, he stepped into the forest, his footsteps silent on the damp earth. The fireflies gathered around him, their lights casting an unearthly glow, illuminating the twisted trees and the shadows that lurked within. He could feel their presence, cold and insidious, pressing against his mind, filling him with a sense of dread that he couldn't shake. As he ventured deeper, the whispers returned, growing louder with each step, filling his thoughts with dark, distorted images of Zara, her face twisted in pain, her eyes pleading for release. "You didn't save me, Alex," the whispers hissed, their voices merging into one dark, insidious chorus. "You only bound me. To you." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, a sickening sensation that twisted his stomach and sent a chill down his spine. He hadn't freed Zara. He had only transferred her curse to himself, binding her spirit to him, trapping her in a prison of memories and shadows. The fireflies closed in, their lights blinding, their whispers filling his mind with dark, insidious thoughts. He could feel Zara's presence, her spirit clinging to him, feeding off his memories, consuming his very essence. She wasn't free. She was bound to him, a shadow in the dark, waiting, feeding, haunting his every step. He tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat, his voice swallowed by the darkness that surrounded him. Pressing in from all sides, the fireflies swarmed, their lights flickering, casting long, twisted shadows that danced across the ground, merging into a dark, writhing mass that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And then, in the heart of the darkness, he saw her. Zara stood before him, her face pale and hollow, her eyes empty, her mouth twisted in a cruel, mocking smile. She reached out, her fingers cold and clawed, her touch like ice against his skin. "You'll never escape, Alex," she whispered, her voice a faint, insidious echo. "I'm with you now. Forever." The fireflies closed in, their lights merging into a blinding glow that filled his mind, consuming his thoughts, his memories, his very soul. He could feel himself slipping away, his essence dissolving into the darkness, merging with Zara's spirit, their souls bound together in an endless, nightmarish cycle. As the last traces of his consciousness faded, he felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet acceptance, knowing that he was finally free, or at least as free as he could be, bound to the shadows, lost in the darkness, a forgotten soul trapped in the forest, forever feeding the fireflies. Chapter 7. The Haunting of Shadows. Days and nights blurred into a continuous feverish dream. Alex wandered the forest, his sense of time slipping away like sand through his fingers. He no longer felt the warmth of the sun or the chill of night. Instead, a relentless, creeping cold filled his bones, an eternal twilight, where light and dark twisted together into a fog that cloaked him in dread. The fireflies were his only companions. They followed him like silent sentries, their ghostly glow casting long shadows that crawled along the forest floor. In their lights, he saw shapes, faces, twisted and tortured, half-formed figures that seemed to reach for him from beyond, as if pleading for release. He couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Zara's presence haunted him like a shadow, a whisper in the darkness, an echo of his worst fears and his deepest regrets. She was with him, trapped within the prison of his mind, feeding on his thoughts, consuming his memories. Every time he remembered her, every fragment of a shared laugh or a distant memory, he felt her spirit pulling closer, tightening her grip on him. The more he clung to her, the deeper the forest drew him in, binding him to its cursed depths. The one night, as he sat beneath the ancient willow tree, he heard a soft, familiar voice. Zara's voice, clear and haunting, carried on the cold wind. "Why didn't you let me go, Alex?" The words were tinged with sorrow, a mournful tone that sent a shiver through his spine. "I tried," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was saving you." A laugh, hollow, bitter, echoed through the trees, and he felt her presence settle beside him, unseen but tangible, a weight pressing down on his chest. "You never understood, did you?" Zara's voice was a murmur in his ear, soft and cold, like ice seeping into his soul. "The fireflies, they weren't just there to torment me. They were keeping me here, binding me to the forest, feeding on me to keep the curse alive. But you You took my place, willingly, and now they have you too. Her words sliced through him, sharp and cruel, and a hollow dread settled in his chest as he realized the truth. He had not saved her. He had only taken her place, bound himself to the darkness that had once held her. He had become the new vessel for the curse, the guardian of the shadows, forever haunted by the spirits that lurked within the forest. The days grew colder, the forest darker, and Alex found himself slipping further from reality. His mind was a labyrinth of forgotten memories, distorted images that twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the nightmare. He no longer knew where he ended and Zara began, their souls entwined, their thoughts merging into one dark, distorted consciousness. He saw her in his dreams, her face twisted and hollow, her eyes empty and accusing. She would stand before him, silent and still, her mouth moving in words he couldn't understand, her form flickering like a dying flame. He would reach for her, desperate to hold on to her, to remember who she had once been, but each time she would dissolve into shadows, slipping through his fingers like smoke. And the fireflies were always there, watching, waiting, their lights pulsing in sync with his heartbeat, a reminder of the darkness that bound them together. One evening, he awoke to find himself standing at the edge of a misty lake, the water dark and still, reflecting the twisted branches of the trees above. The fireflies hovered around him, their lights casting an eerie glow over the water's surface, illuminating the shadows that lurked beneath. In the reflection, he saw Zara's face staring back at him, her eyes wide and pleading, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. She reached for him, her hand breaking the surface of the water, her fingers clawing at the air, desperate and terrified. "Alex," she whispered, her voice faint and broken. "Please, set me free." His chest tightened, and he felt an overwhelming sense of despair, a weight that pressed down on him, suffocating him. He knew he couldn't escape, that he was bound to the forest, trapped within its shadows. But perhaps he could still save her, release her from the darkness that held them both. He knelt by the water's edge, his fingers trembling as he reached out, touching the cold mirror-like surface. The fireflies circled him, their lights intensifying, casting strange, shifting shadows over the lake. He closed his eyes, focusing on the memory of Zara's face, her laughter, her warmth, holding on to each fragment of her he could remember. "Zara," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The water rippled beneath his touch, and he felt a surge of cold, a dark, insidious force that seemed to pull him in, dragging him deeper into the lake, into the darkness. He gasped, struggling against the force, but it was relentless, consuming him, filling his mind with shadows and whispers. The fireflies closed in, their lights blinding, their whispers growing louder, filling his mind with dark, insidious thoughts. He could feel Zara's presence slipping away, fading into the darkness, lost within the shadows of his mind. "No," he whispered, his voice a desperate plea. "Please, don't leave me." But she was already gone, her presence a fading memory, a ghostly echo lost within the depths of the lake. He felt an overwhelming emptiness, a hollow void that consumed him, leaving only darkness in its wake. The fireflies pulsed, their lights flickering, and he felt himself slipping, his mind dissolving into the shadows, merging with the darkness that surrounded him. He was no longer Alex. He was a vessel for the curse, a forgotten soul bound to the forest, lost within its twisted depths. And as he sank into the darkness, he heard Zara's voice, faint and distant, a whisper on the wind, a haunting reminder of the life he had lost. "Remember me, Alex. Remember me." Chapter 8. The Spiral into Darkness. The world outside faded from Alex's memory, slipping further away with each passing day as he wandered the depths of the forest. Reality grew thin and unsteady. The shapes of trees bled together, their branches intertwining to form twisted, unearthly patterns that pulsed with a life of their own. It was as though the forest itself was breathing, watching him, binding him deeper to its shadows. He had become a ghost, trapped in a strange half-life between the living and the dead. The fireflies were always with him, silent and watchful, their faint glow illuminating the darkness that surrounded him. Their lights grew brighter whenever he tried to remember his past, to recall who he had been before the forest had claimed him. But each time he attempted to hold on to a fragment of his old life, the fireflies pulsed and whispered, clouding his mind with dark, insidious thoughts that left him feeling hollow and numb. The memory of Zara was slipping away, becoming nothing more than a distant echo, a vague sense of sorrow that lingered in the back of his mind. Her face appeared in brief flashes, her eyes wide and hollow, her voice a faint, haunting whisper that called to him from beyond the shadows. But he could no longer recall the warmth of her smile, the sound of her laughter. She was becoming a shadow, a phantom, something unreal. And yet, a part of him still clung to her, refusing to let go. He could feel her presence in the depths of his mind, a faint glimmer of light buried beneath the darkness. It was the only thing that kept him anchored, the only thing that reminded him of who he had once been. But the forest was relentless, pressing in on him, filling his mind with its darkness, drowning him in shadows. Tumti. One night, as he sat beneath the gnarled branches of the ancient willow tree, he felt an overwhelming sense of despair settle over him. The fireflies hovered around him, their lights pulsing in slow, rhythmic patterns, casting strange, shifting shadows over the ground. He stared at them, feeling a deep, gnawing emptiness in his chest, a sense of loss that he couldn't fully comprehend. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The fireflies pulsed in response, their lights intensifying, filling his mind with a cold, hollow silence that made his skin crawl. He felt a strange compulsion to reach out, to touch them, to let their cold, eerie light consume him. As his fingers brushed against the nearest firefly, he felt a sudden surge of memories flooding his mind. Images of Zara, her laughter, her smile, the warmth of her touch. He saw them together, running through the forest as children, their laughter echoing through the trees. But the memories were distorted, twisted, each image flickering and fading, replaced by shadows and whispers. And then he saw her face, twisted, hollow, her eyes wide with fear, her mouth open in a silent scream. The fireflies surrounded her, their lights flickering like dying stars, casting an eerie glow over her face. She reached for him, her fingers clawing at the air, desperate and terrified. "Help me, Alex," she whispered, her voice faint and broken. "Please, don't leave me." He recoiled, his heart pounding as the image faded, leaving only darkness. The fireflies pulsed, their whispers growing louder, filling his mind with a cold, insidious presence that left him feeling numb and empty. "Forget her," the whispers hissed, their voices merging into one dark, distorted chorus. "She is lost. You are ours now." A surge of anger rose within him, a desperate, burning need to hold on to her memory, to keep her alive within him. He clenched his fists, his mind fighting against the darkness that sought to consume him, to erase her from his mind. But the fireflies were relentless, their lights blinding, their whispers filling his mind with dark, twisted thoughts. He felt his memories slipping away, fragments of Zara's face and voice fading, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. "No," he whispered, his voice a desperate plea. "Please, don't take her away from me." The fireflies pulsed, their lights flaring with anger, and he felt an overwhelming pressure in his mind, a crushing weight that threatened to tear him apart. His thoughts grew fuzzy, his memories slipping away, dissolving into shadows. He could no longer remember her face, her voice, the warmth of her touch. She was becoming a shadow, a faint, haunting presence that lingered at the edge of his mind, slipping further away with each passing moment. And then, as he felt himself slipping into darkness, a faint, familiar voice broke through the silence. "Alex." The sound was faint, barely audible, but it cut through the darkness like a knife, filling him with a sense of warmth and hope. He clung to it, holding onto the sound, refusing to let it go. It was Zara's voice, calling to him from beyond the shadows, a reminder of the life he had left behind. "Alex, remember me." He felt a surge of strength, a renewed sense of purpose, as he focused on her voice, her memory. He could feel her presence, a faint, glimmering light buried beneath the darkness, a beacon that guided him through the shadows. But the fireflies closed in, their lights flaring with anger, their whispers growing louder, filling his mind with dark, insidious thoughts that sought to drown out her voice. "Forget her," the whispers hissed. "She is gone. You are ours now." But he refused to let go. He fought against the darkness, against the voices that sought to erase her from his mind, clinging to her memory with every ounce of his being. He could feel her presence growing stronger, her voice clearer, as though she were standing beside him, her hand in his. And then, in a sudden burst of light, he saw her face, clear and vivid, her eyes wide with fear, her mouth twisted in a desperate plea for help. "Alex, please, save me." The fireflies swarmed, their lights blinding, their whispers rising to a deafening roar. He felt his mind tearing, his thoughts fracturing as the darkness pressed in on him, suffocating him, drowning him in shadows. But he held on, his will a steady flame in the darkness, fueled by his love for her, his need to keep her alive within him. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her, and felt a surge of warmth, a sense of connection that filled him with hope. And then, with a sudden surge of strength, he pushed back against the fireflies, his mind a battleground of light and darkness, memories and oblivion. He felt the darkness receding, the shadows slipping away, as her presence filled his mind, her voice a beacon that guided him through the night. He opened his eyes and saw her standing before him, her face pale and hollow, her eyes wide and empty. She reached out to him, her fingers cold and clawed, her touch like ice against his skin. "You'll never escape, Alex," she whispered, her voice a faint, insidious echo. "I'm with you now, forever." The fireflies closed in, their lights merging into a blinding glow that filled his mind, consuming his thoughts, his memories, his very soul. He could feel himself slipping away, his essence dissolving into the darkness, merging with Zara's spirit, their souls bound together in an endless nightmarish cycle. As the last traces of his consciousness faded, he felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet acceptance, knowing that he was finally free, or at least as free as he could be, bound to the shadows, lost in the darkness, a forgotten soul trapped in the forest, forever feeding the fireflies. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Forgotten. The forest around Alex was a world of silence and shadows, where time seemed to stretch endlessly, trapping him in a place that existed outside of reality. Every step he took felt like it led him deeper into a dark, suffocating void, where the fireflies flitted in the periphery of his vision, never allowing him a moment of peace. They were his captors, his keepers, bound to him by a curse older than the ancient trees that surrounded him. The fireflies whispered ceaselessly, a maddening hum that drilled into his mind, erasing thoughts before he could form them. Their lights pulsed rhythmically, as if communicating some ancient, forgotten language, one that burrowed into his subconscious, dissolving his memories bit by bit. The more he fought to remember Zara, the more the fireflies filled his head with a numbing darkness. Yet, amidst the haze, he could still feel her presence, an ache deep within him, an invisible thread that bound him to her. He remembered her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled with mischief, and he clung to these memories as his last lifeline. In this forest of endless night, she was his only glimmer of light, his reason for holding on. But the fireflies sensed his defiance. Their lights grew brighter, their whispers louder, pressing in on him like an invisible weight. Each step became harder, each breath more labored, as if the very air in the forest had turned against him. He stumbled through the trees, the fireflies surrounding him, their glow illuminating fleeting images that danced in the darkness, twisted faces, shadowy forms reaching out with skeletal hands. He tried to block out the visions, but they grew stronger, filling his mind with images of loss, pain, and despair. The forest wanted him to submit, to surrender to its darkness, to become part of the shadows that lurked within. He could feel it, a pull deep within him, urging him to let go, to dissolve into the night. As he wandered, he found himself drawn to a familiar path, one that led to the heart of the forest. It was the place where he and Zara had once carved their names into the old willow tree, a symbol of their bond, a promise to never forget each other. Now, that memory felt like a distant dream, a fragment of a life he could barely recall. But something compelled him to return, a feeling that Zara was waiting for him there, that this was where he would find the answers he sought. The journey was treacherous. The fireflies swarmed around him, their lights blinding, their whispers filling his head with thoughts that were not his own. He stumbled, his vision blurring as the shadows closed in, twisting and shifting, forming shapes that slithered and crawled through the darkness. Faces appeared in the trees, eyes watching him with a malevolent hunger, mouths twisting into mocking smiles. He pushed forward, his determination the only thing keeping him grounded. Zara's image flickered in his mind, her face a beacon in the darkness, urging him to keep going. The fireflies grew agitated, their whispers turning to shrill hisses, their lights flashing angrily as he neared the clearing. And then he saw it, the ancient willow tree, standing tall and silent at the center of the clearing. Its branches drooped like dark curtains, casting long shadows over the ground. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the soft hum of the fireflies. As he approached the tree, he felt a strange energy emanating from it, a dark, pulsing force that seemed to vibrate in the very air around him. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the rough bark, and felt a surge of memories flood his mind. Images of Zara, her laughter, her warmth, the days they had spent together, each moment etched into his soul. But there was something else, a memory buried deep within him, one that he had forgotten, hidden away in the darkest corners of his mind. He closed his eyes, focusing on the memory, and felt himself slipping into a vision, transported to a day long ago, back when they were just children. He saw himself and Zara standing beneath the willow tree, their hands clasped, their faces filled with innocent joy. They had made a promise that day, a vow to always be there for each other, to never let go, no matter what. But then, the memory shifted, twisting into something darker. He saw Zara's face change, her eyes filling with fear as she looked into the depths of the forest. Shadows crept closer, and the fireflies appeared, their lights flickering ominously, their whispers growing louder. He could feel their presence, a cold, malevolent force that wrapped around them, binding them to the forest. In that moment, he realized the truth. The curse had not been Zara's alone. It had bound them both, sealing their fates, linking their souls to the darkness that lurked within the forest. They had become part of the shadows, their spirits intertwined, their lives forever tethered to the night. The vision faded, and Alex opened his eyes, his heart pounding as he looked at the willow tree. He could feel Zara's presence more strongly now, a haunting echo that filled the air around him. She was here, trapped within the shadows, bound to the curse that had claimed them both. "Zara," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm here. I know now. I understand." The fireflies swarmed around him, their lights flashing, their whispers growing louder as he spoke her name. They seemed to sense his defiance, his refusal to submit to the darkness. But he held his ground, his determination unwavering as he reached out to the shadows, calling to her, summoning her spirit. And then he saw her. Zara's figure appeared within the circle of fireflies, her form faint and translucent, her eyes wide and empty. She looked at him, her expression filled with sorrow and longing, a ghostly figure bound to the shadows. She reached out to him, her hand trembling as she took a step forward, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Alex, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." He stepped forward, his hand reaching out to hers, his heart aching as he looked into her eyes. "It wasn't your fault, Zara. We were children. We didn't know what we were doing. But now, we can break this. Together." She shook her head, her expression filled with despair. "It's too late, Alex. The forest has claimed us. We're bound to the shadows, to the curse. There's no escape." But he refused to accept it. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, and felt a surge of warmth, a connection that filled him with hope. "I won't let you go, Zara, not again. We can end this. We can be free." The fireflies swarmed around them, their lights blinding, their whispers filling his mind with darkness. But he held on to her, his will a steady flame in the night, refusing to let the shadows consume him. He could feel the curse tightening, the darkness pressing in, but he stood firm, his love for her a shield against the night. As he held her, he felt a shift in the air, a subtle change in the energy around them. The fireflies grew agitated, their lights flickering erratically, their whispers turning to shrieks of anger. The darkness seemed to waver, the shadows recoiling, and he realized that the curse was weakening, unraveling. "Remember who you are, Zara," he whispered, his voice filled with conviction. "Remember us. Remember our promise." In that moment, she looked at him, truly looked at him, and he saw a spark of recognition in her eyes. The emptiness faded, replaced by warmth, by life. She smiled, a sad, haunting smile that filled him with both sorrow and hope. "Thank you, Alex," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude, "for not giving up on me." The fireflies scattered, their lights winking out one by one, leaving only silence. The forest grew still, the shadows retreating, and he felt a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet acceptance that filled him with a profound sense of calm. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the clearing, he looked at Zara, her figure clear and vivid, her eyes filled with warmth and recognition. They had broken the curse, severed the bond that had bound them to the darkness. They were free. Together, they left the forest, their souls entwined, their spirits liberated. And as they walked away, the fireflies watched in silence, their lights fading into the shadows, their whispers a faint echo of a curse that had finally been broken. They had found peace, but the forest would remain, a silent guardian of the forgotten, waiting for the next soul to wander into its depths, to become part of its shadows. Chapter 10. Into the Eternal Night. The forest was silent, an oppressive, timeless quiet that pressed down on Alex's spirit like a crushing weight. Every sense of self, every memory of who he had been, was slipping away, unraveling in the shadows that surrounded him. Only the whispers of the fireflies remained, their haunting lull filling his mind, seeping into his soul, binding him deeper to the darkness. Zara's presence lingered faintly beside him, a familiar shadow intertwined with his own. In fleeting moments, he could feel her, a sensation of cold fingers brushing against his own, a ghostly echo of her voice murmuring his name in the wind. But her memory was fractured, fading, and the more he tried to hold on to it, the stronger the fireflies pulsed, their lights flaring in sync with his heartbeat, urging him to let go, to submit. "Forget her," they whispered, their voices wrapping around him like tendrils of smoke. "Let her fade." The whispering left him hollow and empty, a darkness creeping in, consuming him inch by inch. But Alex resisted, gripping tightly to Zara's fading image, summoning every memory he could muster. He was her last tether to the living, her final link to a world beyond the forest. He had come here to save her, and though he had failed, a glimmer of his purpose burned in him still, a flame that had yet to be extinguished. One night, as he wandered the mist-shrouded paths, he heard a distant voice, Zara's voice, echoing faintly through the trees. It was a sorrowful sound, barely more than a breath, but it filled him with a sudden sense of urgency. He followed the voice, his footsteps soft and hesitant, his heart pounding as he ventured deeper into the forest. The trees grew denser, their branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. The darkness thickened around him, and the fireflies gathered, their lights forming a path that led him through the labyrinth of trees. The air grew colder, a chill that seeped into his bones, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over him. As he reached a small clearing, he saw her, Zara, standing at the center, her figure faint and translucent, her eyes wide and empty. She looked at him, but there was no recognition, no warmth. She was a shadow, a ghost, a creature bound to the darkness just as he was. "Zara," he whispered, his voice breaking the silence, but she didn't respond. She simply stared at him, her expression hollow, her eyes filled with a sorrow that he could feel deep within his soul. The fireflies circled her, their lights casting strange, shifting shadows over her face. They pulsed in unison, a haunting rhythm that seemed to mirror her heartbeat. And in that moment, Alex realized the truth. Zara was no longer human. She had become a part of the forest, a creature bound to the curse, a spirit trapped within the shadows. But he couldn't let go. Not now. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cold, translucent skin, and felt a surge of memories flood his mind. Images of their childhood, of laughter, of warmth. He clung to those memories, refusing to let them fade, refusing to let her slip away. "Zara," he whispered, his voice filled with desperation. "I know you're still in there. I know you can hear me. Please, don't leave me." For a brief moment, her eyes flickered with recognition. A faint glimmer of the girl he had once known. She opened her mouth, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Alex, I'm sorry." Her words sent a chill through him, and he felt his heart break as he saw the sorrow in her eyes. She was lost, bound to the darkness, and there was nothing he could do to save her. The fireflies had claimed her, just as they had claimed him, and there was no escape from the curse that held them both. But he couldn't accept it. Not yet. Not while he still had the strength to fight. He reached out, his fingers intertwining with hers, and felt a surge of warmth, a spark of life that filled him with hope. He focused on that feeling, holding on to it with every ounce of his being, refusing to let it slip away. The fireflies pulsed with anger, their lights flaring, their whispers filling his mind with dark, insidious thoughts. They urged him to let go, to submit to the darkness, to forget her. But he resisted, his mind a battleground of light and shadow, memories and oblivion. "Zara," he whispered, his voice a steady flame in the darkness. "I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not ever." He felt her fingers tighten around his, a faint, trembling grip that filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. She was still there, buried beneath the darkness, a spark of life that had yet to be extinguished. And as long as he held on to her, as long as he refused to let go, he knew that she would survive. The fireflies closed in, their lights blinding, their whispers rising to a deafening roar. But he stood his ground, his will a steady flame in the darkness, fueled by his love for her, his need to keep her alive within him. And then, in a sudden burst of light, he felt the darkness shatter, the shadows receding as a surge of warmth filled his soul. He could feel Zara's presence growing stronger, her spirit intertwining with his, a bond that could not be broken. The fireflies scattered, their lights winking out one by one, leaving only silence. The forest was still, the shadows retreating, and he felt a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet acceptance that filled him with a profound sense of calm. He looked at Zara, her figure clear and vivid, her eyes filled with warmth and recognition. She smiled, a sad, haunting smile that filled him with a mixture of sorrow and relief. "Thank you, Alex," she whispered, her voice soft and filled with gratitude, "for not giving up on me." He took her hand, his fingers intertwined with hers, and felt a sense of completion, a feeling of unity that transcended the darkness that had once held them. They were free, their souls entwined, bound together in a bond that could not be broken. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, they stood together, their spirits united, their souls forever bound to each other. And in that moment, they knew that they had found peace.